The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, just after 10 o'clock in Seoul. There was no warning siren, no flash in the sky. One moment, the giant public view screens in the city center showed advertisements for coffee and new hover vehicles. The next, they all went dark, followed by a universal, grating frequency that made teeth ache. In the Terran Oversight Directorate, a building that most citizens thought handled weather satellites and deep space mining permits, senior analyst Kim Yuna did not look up from her report. The painful tone was just the universal carrier wave. The real message would come next. Across the galaxy, on a billion worlds, the same broadcast began. The creature that appeared on every screen was tall and sharp. Its skin was like polished metal feathers, and its eyes were black pools. It was the Fleet Lord of the Kelios Dominion. Its voice, translated instantly by galactic standard protocols, was cold and clear. People of the galaxy, this is a declaration of judgment. 10,000 years ago, a truce was forced upon the species known as humanity. This Terra Quarantine Edict was a mercy, a pause to allow a violent, unstable child to grow. We have watched. We have assessed. They have not grown. They have simply become quieter. Their potential for chaos remains, a poisoned seed in the Garden of Peace. Therefore, the Kelios Dominion, as the guardians of order, hereby declare the truce finished. The quarantine is lifted. Our fleets are already moving. The correction of Earth begins now. In a cafe below Yuna's office window, people stopped. They stared at the screen, mugs frozen halfway to their lips. A young man dropped his phone. The silence on the street was total, thick with shock. This was the moment every disaster film had ever shown. This was the panic, the scream, the end. Yuna finally looked up from her data slate. She watched the Fleet Lord's sharp face repeat its message on the wall-mounted screen in her quiet office. She took a slow sip from her mug of now lukewarm coffee. Her lips twitched. Then she let out a soft, dry sound, a puff of air that was almost, but not quite, a laugh. It was a chuckle, the kind of sound you make when you see a predictable, annoying thing happen exactly as you knew it would. Her office door slid open. Tactical Coordinator Park Jun walked in, his tablet in hand. He looked tired, like a man who had pulled an all-nighter. He did not look afraid. "You saw?" he asked, his voice flat. "I saw," Yuna said, setting her mug down. "He's very dramatic. Good production value on the hologram. The poison seed line is a bit much, don't you think?" Jun did not chuckle. He walked to the window and looked down at the frozen street. He watched a woman slowly pick up the child she had been holding, clutching her close. He sighed. It was a deep, weary sound that came from the very bottom of his lungs. It was not a sigh of fear. It was the sigh of a man who has just been told he has to deal with a massive, time-consuming problem he really did not need today. "They're early," Jun said, turning from the window. "Our projections said they'd make their move next fiscal quarter, at least." "The Kelios have never been good at patience," Yuna replied, standing up. "It's their defining flaw. Alert the council. And get Mina and Tay from downstairs. We need to go to the vault." "The vault?" Jun asked, though he was already sending the alerts from his tablet. "We're really doing that? I thought it was just a story for history books." "Everything is just a story until it's not," Yuna said, grabbing her simple gray jacket. "The truce was a story they told the galaxy. The vault is the story we were told to keep. Now it's time to read the fine print." Down on the street, the panic was starting. The first shouts began. A hovercar alarm wailed. The screen still showed the Fleet Lord, a silent, menacing statue of alien declaration. Yuna and Jun moved through the sleek, quiet halls of the Directorate. They passed other analysts, men and women with names like Jiho and Hannah and Seojun. No one was running. Some looked serious. A few even shared the same tired expression as Jun. One young tech, seeing Yuna, gave a small, nervous smile. Yuna nodded back, her face calm. They met security lead Kong Tae and pilot Lee Mina by the underground garage. Tae was a broad, quiet man who checked the charge on his non-lethal pulse rifle. Mina was small and sharp-eyed, already studying a flight path on her wristcom. "No grand send-off?" Mina asked, her voice crisp. No time, Yuna said, sliding into the front passenger seat of a plane, armored vehicle. Tay took the wheel. And no need for drama. We're not going to a battle. We're going to an archive. The vehicle pulled out into the chaotic street. People were rushing, but Tay drove with a calm, steady pressure. He did not use the siren. He simply moved forward, and people parted for the official-looking car. As they drove away from the gleaming towers, towards the older, administrative sector of the city, June looked back at the panic. They're afraid, he said softly. They're allowed to be, Yuna said, watching the city blur past. They don't know the joke yet. And what's the joke? Mina asked from the back. Yuna looked ahead, a faint, unamused smile on her face. The joke is that they think this is a war. We've been preparing for 10,000 years, but not for a war. We've been preparing for a very, very long argument. The vehicle turned into the secure lot of a bland, government building that dealt in tax records. This was the place, the start of it all. The real answer was not in a weapon but in a file. And as they stepped out into the cool morning air, the distant sound of sirens finally beginning to wail across Seoul, Yuna's single chuckle in her office seemed to hang in the air. The first and only human laugh in the face of the galaxy's end. It was not a laugh of courage. It was the laugh of someone who has seen the other person's cards and knows they have already lost. The administrative building was the most boring place any of them had ever seen. It was a block of faded gray concrete, built in the last century. A small sign by the door said, Regional Tax Archive, Section 7. A few people in plain suits walked in and out, carrying cups of coffee and looking sleepy. It was the perfect disguise. Tay parked the vehicle in a marked spot. No one looked at them twice. Yuna, June, Mina, and Tay walked to the front doors like they were just here for a boring meeting. The air inside smelled like old paper and cleaning spray. A security guard at a desk nodded to Tay. They walked past. They did not go to an elevator. Instead, June led them to a stairwell at the back of the building. They went down and down. The lights changed from warm yellow to a cool, blue-white. The sound of the city vanished. The air became still and dry. After several flights, they reached a door that looked no different from any other. June pressed his hand against a smooth panel on the wall. There was no beep, no flash of light, but the door slid open silently. Beyond it was a small, round room. The walls were made of a soft, pearly white material that gave off its own light. In the center of the room was a pedestal. On the pedestal was a single object. It was not a weapon. It was a box. It was about the size of a lunch pail, made of a dark, smooth metal that seemed to drink in the light. The vault, Yuna said. Her voice was quiet in the still room. Or what everyone calls the vault. It's really just a lockbox. Mina stepped closer, looking around. Where are the defenses? The shields? The big guns? The boredom is the defense, June said, walking to the pedestal. No one would ever think the most important secret on Earth is hidden in a tax building. The ones who made the truce, they understood that. The best way to hide something forever is to make it seem utterly unimportant. Tay stood by the door, his posture relaxed but his eyes watching everything. So what's in the box? The super weapon that scared them off. Yuna approached the box. She didn't touch it. She just looked at it. That's what the Kelios have always believed. They think the EVM gave us a terrible weapon. A threat so big it forced the truce. They think we've been hiding it for 10,000 years, waiting to use it. And have we? Mina asked. No, June said. He took a deep breath. We've been hiding the truth. And the truth is usually stranger and simpler than a weapon. Yuna reached out. She placed her palm flat on the top of the box. The metal was cool. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, lines of soft blue light appeared under her hand, spreading across the surface like cracks in ice. There was a series of soft clicks, like an old lock turning. The top of the box split into segments and slid back, folding into itself. The light from inside was a gentle, warm yellow. They all leaned forward to look. Inside, There was no glowing crystal, no ancient bomb. There were two things. One was a stack of thin, transparent data slates, the kind used millennia ago. They looked fragile. The other item lay on top of them. It was a piece of paper. Real, old paper, now preserved under a clear field. It was a drawing. A child's drawing. The paper was brown at the edges. The colors were faded but still visible. There was a big, smiling yellow sun in the corner. Below it were two stick figures. One was tall with 3 lines coming from its head, maybe meant to be feathers or antennae. The other was shorter. They were holding hands. Scrawled in clumsy, ancient common galactic at the bottom were the words, "We can be friends." No one spoke. The silence in the room was complete. Mina finally broke it, her voice a whisper. "A drawing? They were scared of a drawing?" "Not the drawing," Una said softly. She reached in carefully. She picked up the top data slate. It lit up at her touch. Words began to scroll in the air above it, in the clean, formal script of the ancient Evum. The title was Psychological and Temporal Assessment, Species Designation Human. June read the words aloud, his voice steady but quiet. Subject: Human Soldier, Designation Jiho. Stranded during initial skirmish on lunar body Gamma 7. Isolated. Enemy forces withdrew, considering the moon barren and the subject dead. Monitoring continued. Una swiped her hand, and the text changed. It was no longer a report. It was a log. Entries began to appear, dated over what seemed like years. Year 1, Day 15. Subject has finished consuming emergency rations. Begins mining lunar ice for water. Year 3, Day 102. Subject has dismantled the wreck of his fighter craft. Not for escape. He is building a garden dome. Year 12, Day 44. The garden is thriving. Subject has created a sustainable biosphere from algae and engineered soil. He has built a bench. He sits on it and looks at the stars for hours. Year 28, Day 311. Subject has begun constructing a large structure from scrap metal. It appears to be a monument. It bears the insignia of both his own unit and the Kelios precursor unit he fought. Year 47, Day 1. Evum mediation vessel finally enters the system. We make contact. The subject's first transmission is not a cry for rescue. It is a request. He asks if the other guys are okay, and if they would like to discuss the terms for a shared use of the moon. He has prepared a treaty, and a meal from his garden. June stopped reading. He looked at Una, his face pale. 47 years, Mina said, the number hanging in the air. Alone, on a rock. And he built a garden? He wrote a treaty. The Evum saw it, Una said, putting the slate down gently. They saw one man, alone, with nothing but time and will. And they didn't see a soldier. They saw a fact. A terrifying fact. They saw a species that does not break on a timeline any other culture can understand. We don't fight on the scale of battles. We endure on the scale of centuries. She looked at the child's drawing again, the hopeful, simple lines. The truce wasn't because we had a weapon that could destroy them, Una said. It was because they realized we had a mind that could outlast them. The box doesn't hold a threat. It holds a diagnosis. And the Kelios just declared war on a diagnosis. Tay, from his post by the door, let out a low breath. It wasn't a chuckle. It was the sound of understanding. So what do we do? Una carefully closed the box. The light faded. We show them their mistake. Gently. The return drive to the Terran Oversight Directorate was silent. Mina stared out the window, but she did not see the city. She saw a lonely rock and a man building a bench for a garden no one would visit for half a lifetime. Tay drove with the same steady focus, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. June read the translated Evum files on his tablet, scrolling slowly, his face grim. Only Una seemed unchanged. She watched the city pass, her expression calm. The panic in the streets was growing. News feeds on public screens showed the Kelios fleet, a dark swarm of angular ships, already crossing the orbit of Jupiter. Their estimated arrival time flashed in red numbers, 72 hours. Inside the secure operations room, the mood was tense but quiet. The staff, men and women with names like Chaiwon and Day and Subin, worked at their stations. There were no shouted orders. There were only low voices and the soft tapping of keys. June connected the data slate from the vault to the main system. The ancient EVM report filled the central screen. "It's all here," June said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "The entire verdict. It's not a treaty. It's a medical report." He pulled up the key section. The words were cold, clinical, and final. Species, human. Designation, temporal persistence threat, class Omega. Observation. The subject species possesses a psychological elasticity and a perception of time that is incompatible with standard interstellar conflict resolution. Where a Helios warrior seeks a decisive victory within a solar cycle, a human soldier considers a decade a manageable setback. Where another culture would surrender to avoid extinction, humanity would simply wait. They would retreat, adapt, and prepare to outlive the conflict itself. Case study. Soldier Jiho, see attached logs, is not an outlier. He is a clear example. His actions were not those of hope, but of absolute, unbreakable certainty. Certainty that the situation would change. Certainty that he would be there when it did. Judgment. Engaging humanity in a war of annihilation is a logical impossibility for any species bound by conventional mortality and morale. You cannot defeat an enemy that perceives a century of hardship as a period of interesting times. You cannot break an enemy whose definition of victory includes the option of simply surviving you. Recommendation. A quarantine is the only solution. Not a quarantine of space, but of context. Let them believe a truce was brokered by mutual threat. Let the galaxy believe they are contained by a force they fear. The truth that they are being isolated for the psychological safety of all other sentient life must be hidden. For their sake and for ours. The room was utterly still. A young analyst, Lee Hannah, spoke first, her voice small. "They were protecting the galaxy. From us? From our patients," Yuna corrected softly, turning from the screen. "They saw a man alone for 47 years, and they didn't see a tragedy. They saw a future. They saw their great-great-grandchildren fighting a war their ancestors started, against humans who had never stopped thinking it was still yesterday's argument." On the main screen, a tactical overlay now showed the Helios fleet. It was massive. Hundreds of ships. They were deploying in a classic siege formation around Mars. "Our historical files confirm it," June said, bringing up more data. "The EVM never gave us a weapon. They came to our leaders 10,000 years ago. They told them the truth. They said, the Helios want to fight a war. If you fight it on their terms, in their time frame, you will lose because they are stronger now. But if you let them fight the war they imagine, you will destroy them in ways they cannot comprehend. You will drain their purpose across generations until they are empty. So we will make a show. We will make a grand truce. They will believe it is because we forced you to. You will know it is because we are begging you not to." He looked around the room. "Our ancestors agreed. They chose the long, quiet path. For 10,000 years, our real military spending hasn't been on bigger ships. It's been on deeper bunkers, better recycling systems, faster terraforming, cultural continuity programs. We weren't preparing to win a war. We were preparing to last through one." A red alert flashed on the screen. The lead Helios ship was hailing them. A universal demand for surrender. Director Kwan, an older man with a tired face, looked at Yuna. "It's your protocol, senior analyst. You've studied the EVM judgment. What is our response?" Yuna walked to the communications panel. She did not sit in the big command chair. She leaned over the technician's shoulder. "Open a channel. Video. Just to them." The technician nodded. "Channel open." On the screen, the fierce face of the Helios fleet lord appeared. His black eyes stared out. "People of Earth, you have seen our might. You have one final chance to submit to correction." Yuna looked directly into the camera. Her face was not angry. It was polite, the way a librarian might look at someone talking too loud. "Fleet Lord, This is Senior Analyst Kim Yuna of the Terran Oversight Directorate. We acknowledge your declaration. We have received your demand. She paused. The Fleet Lord waited, expecting fear or defiance. However, Yuna continued, her voice clear and calm. There appears to be a procedural error. The Terra Quarantine Edict was not a military truce. It was a public health order. You are not declaring war. You are revoking our isolation. This requires different forms. The Fleet Lord's feathers twitched. Do not play word games, human. Your time is up. Time is the one thing we have plenty of, Yuna said, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. We are sending you the relevant documents from the original EVM arbitration now, including the full psychological assessment. Please review them. While you do, we must ask, what is your intended timeline for this conflict? Our initial projections suggest a minimum duration of 1,200 years for a meaningful resolution. We need to schedule accordingly. The Kelios on the screen went very still. The words made no sense to it. 1,200 years? It was a number for geology, not for war. You are insane, the Fleet Lord hissed. No, Yuna said, her smile fading into simple seriousness. We are patient. We will await your review of the documents. Terran oversight out. She nodded. The technician cut the channel. The screen returned to the view of the enemy fleet. Everyone in the room stared at her. June finally let out the breath he was holding. It sounded almost like a laugh. You asked them for a schedule? He said. The first step in any long project, Yuna said, turning back to her team, is setting a realistic timeline. They need to understand what they've started. They think they've lit a fuse. They need to realize they've planted a tree. One that their grandchildren will have to water. Outside, the Kelios fleet loomed, dark and deadly and ready for a fight. Inside, the humans began to work, not with the frantic energy of battle, but with the calm, deliberate pace of people settling in for a very, very long wait. For 3 days, the Kelios fleet hovered near Mars. On Earth, people watched and waited. The initial panic had dulled into a strange, nervous quiet. There were no heroic speeches from leaders, no calls to arms. Instead, the news showed brief, calm statements about civil defense protocols and resource management planning. Schools and offices remained open. In the Terran Oversight Directorate, the work was not about weapons. Yuna, June, and their team were buried in logistics. Their main screen did not show missile trajectories. It showed a complicated chart with titles like Generational Housing, Phase 1, and Closed-Loop Agriculture, Subsector 7. Mina came into the operations room, her pilot's jacket draped over her arm. They're moving, she announced. All eyes went to the tactical screen. The Kelios fleet was breaking its formation. A single, spear-shaped destroyer detached from the main group. It began accelerating towards Earth. It's a provocation, June said, standing up. They didn't like the paperwork. They want a real response. Yuna didn't look up from her data slate. Where is it heading? Mina checked her own tablet. Trajectory suggests a low-orbit pass over the Asian-Pacific region. Possibly a show of force. Or they're targeting something. They'll target something unimportant, Yuna said. To see us flinch. Activate Long Watch Protocol Sequence 1. The answer is no, thank you. June gave the orders. Across the planet, in hidden bases and deep underground centers, a different kind of system hummed to life. It was not a weapon grid. It was a construction grid. The Kelios destroyer, the glorious Talon, sliced into Earth's upper atmosphere. Its commander, a proud warrior named Keth, watched the blue and white planet fill his view. He expected to see fear. He expected defensive fire to rise up, pathetic and easily swatted aside. He saw nothing. Cities glittered peacefully below. They hide in their holes, Keth said to his second. Target the structure on the coordinates given. The Lunar Memorial Research Station, on the far side of their moon. It is isolated. It is symbolic. Turn it to dust. The glorious Talon swung around the planet, its weapons powering up. On the moon, the station was a small, dome-shaped facility used mostly for astronomy. It had a staff of 15. They had been evacuated days ago. The ship fired. A silent beam of crimson energy lanced through space and struck the center of the dome. There was a flash. A cloud of debris billowed out into the vacuum, freezing instantly. On the glorious Talon's bridge, the crew watched with satisfaction. Clean, decisive blow. The first of the war. Keth waited for the reaction. An angry hail. A retaliation. A plea. His communications officer turned to him, looking confused. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the lunar surface. It is not on emergency channels. It is a standard construction logistics band." "Put it on speaker," Keth ordered, his feathers ruffling. A human voice, cheerful and automated, filled the bridge. "Thank you for your debris contribution. This site has been cleared for redevelopment under Terran Renewal Plan TRP-114. Prefabricated units are en route. Projected rebuild time, 6 days. Please avoid the construction zone. Have a nice solar cycle." Then, on the visual screen, Keth saw them. Dozens of small, boxy drones, painted in bright yellow and orange, zipped out from hidden caches on the lunar surface. They began swarming over the wreckage. Magnetic grapplers pulled chunks of metal apart. Other drones sprayed a fast-hardening foam over the crater, creating a level foundation. It was fast, efficient, and utterly ignoring the warship hovering above. What is this?" Keth's second stammered. Before he could answer, a new alert sounded. "Commander, incoming object from the Earth's surface. Small. No energy signature. It is on an intercept course." It was a single, unarmed cargo shuttle. It flew right up to the glorious Talon and matched its speed. A request for docking, airlock to airlock, chimed politely. Furious but curious, Keth allowed it. A human in a simple gray suit, carrying a tablet, cycled through. He was a young man with a calm face. His name badge said, Park Jiho Site Coordinator. Jiho stood on the alien bridge, looked at the fierce Keelians, and gave a small, polite bow. "Commander, thank you for not shooting the shuttle. That would have required more paperwork." He held out his tablet. "I'm here to discuss the debris field you just created. According to Terran Orbital Cleanliness Code, Section 45, the creator of space debris is responsible for its mitigation or a cleanup fee. Since you are a non-Terran entity, we've prepared a waiver, but we need your ship signature and a commitment to avoid the sector during our rebuild." Keth stared. He felt a cold, strange feeling in his stomach. It was not fear. It was the first drip of understanding. They were not fighting a war. They were being given a bill. You rebuilt?" Keth finally managed to say. "Oh yes," Jiho said, as if discussing the weather. "Much nicer, too. The old dome was 50 years old. The new one will have a better garden. We're adding a viewing lounge facing the crater you made. We'll even put up a small plaque. First engagement site. Please mind the dust. It's educational." Keth looked back at the main screen. The yellow drones were already assembling the skeleton of a new, larger dome. It was happening in fast-forward like a video played at high speed. The humans were not mourning their loss. They were using it as an excuse for renovation. "Leave," Keth said, his voice hollow. Jiho nodded. "Of course. I'll leave the fee waiver with your communications officer. You can file it at your convenience. The rebuild will be done in less than a week. You're welcome to visit when it's finished. We'll put on a pot of tea." Jiho left as calmly as he had arrived. The shuttle detached and drifted back towards Earth. On the bridge of the glorious Talon, the crew was silent. They watched the cheerful, relentless drones building on the screen. They had come for glory, for the sharp, clean story of victory. Instead, they had become a minor nuisance, a source of construction materials, and a bureaucratic footnote. Back on Earth, in the operations room, Yuna received the report. She read Jiho's summary and looked at the live feed of the buzzing drones on the moon. June sat down next to her. "They shot first. We sent a building inspector. How do you think they're feeling?" Yuna finally allowed herself a small, real smile. confused. And confusion is the first step. You can't maintain rage for a century if you're just confused. They wanted a fire. We're giving them a chore. On the screen, the Kelios destroyer turned and began to accelerate back towards its fleet, moving a little faster than before, as if trying to escape the quiet, polite reality that was already fixing the hole it had made. The mood on Earth settled into a rhythm that was stranger than panic. People went to work. Children went to school. But now, part of the lesson plan was about extended civics and resource cycling. News reports talked about the Kelios fleet around Mars like it was a long-term weather pattern, like a persistent storm system that might last for a few generations. In the operations room, the focus shifted. Yuna and June now oversaw what was called the courtesy campaign. It was not a military strategy. It was a protocol of relentless, polite normality. The Kelios, frustrated by the lunar incident, tried a new tactic. They began a blockade. They positioned ships near key human trade routes to the asteroid belt, threatening any vessel that passed. Human response. Within hours, every blockaded human freighter turned around. They did not protest. They simply changed course for Mars. Let them have the asteroid belt routes for now, Yuna said, studying a solar system map. Activate the Saturn Initiative and send the Kelios Fleet Lord a message. Tell him we've rerouted our mining operations to the moons of Saturn in accordance with their safety concerns. Thank him for making us explore new resources. Attach the new flight paths so his ships don't accidentally get in the way. June sent the message. The sheer, boring helpfulness of it was a new kind of weapon. The Kelios escalated again. They used a powerful energy pulse to knock out the main deep space communications array orbiting Earth. It was a vital link for talking to colonies on Jupiter's moons. The array went dark. For 12 hours, there was silence. Then, a new signal bloomed on the network. It was stronger, clearer, and it came from a brand new array, built in secret on the far side of Earth's moon. Not only was it operational, but its first broadcast was a repeating loop on all Kelios frequencies. It was a language lesson. A calm human voice spoke in simple galactic common. Hello. Welcome to the Terran Open Channel. In light of recent disruptions to communications, we are providing this service. Today's phrase is, I require a status update. Repeat after me. I require a status update. Played over and over. Along with the audio, simple, helpful diagrams showed a Kelios and a human exchanging data slates. On the bridge of the Kelios command ship, the Fleet Lord listened to the looping, polite tutorial. His feathers were flat with a fury that had nowhere to go. They had destroyed a key military target, and the humans had responded by building a better one and using it to teach his soldiers basic vocabulary. They are mocking us, he roared. His science officer, an older Kelios with faded feathers, studied the data. Fleet Lord, they are not. The signal contains no sarcasm, no hidden codes. It is just a lesson. The construction speed of the new array is, however, militarily significant. They built a moon-base-sized structure in 12 hours. They did not even try to hide it. They wanted us to see. That is a threat, the Fleet Lord insisted. Or a fact, the science officer said quietly. They are demonstrating capacity, not for war but for infrastructure. They are showing us they can fix anything we break, faster than we can break it. The Fleet Lord ordered a new strike, a targeted, precise raid on a remote human outpost on Mars, a place called Tranquility Research Station. It was a soft target full of scientists. The raid was a perfect military operation. Kelios dropships screamed into the thin Martian atmosphere. They blew open the main airlock. Their warriors, clad in gleaming armor, stormed inside, weapons ready. The station was empty. Not just empty of people. It was empty of everything. The halls were spotless. The labs were bare. A single data slate sat on a table in the central room. On it was a message, temporarily relocated for renovations. Back soon. Station Manager Lee Hanna. As the Kelios warriors stood in the silent, pristine halls, a human mining transport, passing by on its new route to Saturn, sent a friendly hail. Hey, Kelios guys. If you're going to be using the station, the thermostat is tricky. Turn the dial left for heat. Don't force it or it'll break. Instructions are in the top drawer. Have fun. The warriors looked at each other. The fight had gone out of the airlock with the atmosphere. Back on Earth, Una received the report from the evacuated station manager, Hannah, who was now working from a cozy office in Iceland. Hannah was laughing. They looked so confused on the internal cameras, senior analyst, like they'd broken into a hotel that was closed for the season. June shook his head, a smile finally touching his lips. They're trained for resistance, for fear, for fury. They don't have a manual for this. Good, Una said. She pulled up a new file. Now, Phase 2 of the courtesy campaign. We thank them for their interest in our Martian real estate. Send them a standard lease agreement for the use of Tranquility Station. A fair market rate, payable in any useful materials. Include a clause about leaving the place as they found it. And if they refuse? If they just destroy it? June asked. Una shrugged. Then we'll send a construction drone to assess the damage and send them the bill. And we'll build another one somewhere else. The outcome is the same. They get a bill. We get a new station. They expend rage. We expend effort. She looked at the main screen, which showed the Helios fleet, still vast and powerful, hanging in the silent dark. They came for a war of destruction, she said softly. But you can't destroy a river by throwing rocks in it. The water just flows around, wears the rocks down, and keeps going. We are the river, and we have all the time in the world to wear them down. A notification popped up. It was from the Saturn Mining Initiative. They had found a new vein of minerals. The yield was projected to be 15% higher than the asteroid belt. The attached note read, "Thanks to the Helios for the motivation to look here." Una forwarded the note to the Helios fleet lord, with a simple message, "Shared success is the best success. We'll send a sample." In the depths of space, the fleet lord received the message and the mining report. He read it twice. He did not roar this time. He just felt very, very tired. The humans were not fighting him. They were outliving him, already moving on to the next thing, and politely thanking him for the opportunity. The war, which the Helios still called the correction, had become a background fact of life. For humans, it was the long misunderstanding. Children were born, grew old, and died, all while the Helios fleet still hung in the sky near Mars. Their ships, once sleek and new, now showed signs of long-term wear. Patching and repairs were constant. On Earth, very little seemed different. Cities were brighter. Parks were greener. The big change was underground and off-world. Vast, self-sustaining arcologies thrived beneath the surface. Gardens on Mars and the Moon were lush. The human population was stable, happy, and profoundly patient. In what was now called the Continuity Office, once the Terran Oversight Directorate, Una's granddaughter, Kim Era, sat at a desk. She had the same calm eyes as her grandmother. On the main screen, a familiar face appeared, the Helios Fleet Lord. It was not the same one. This was the third Fleet Lord to hold the post since the Declaration. This one's name was KTH. His feathers were dull, and his eyes held a deep, weary confusion. His grandfather had started this war. His father had continued it. Now it was his duty. "Era, we are receiving a priority hail from Fleet Lord KTH, said the comms officer, a man named Minsu. "Put him through, please," Era said, smoothing her simple tunic. The Fleet Lord's face filled the screen. "Acting Director Kim, we are detecting unauthorized energy signatures from your outpost on the Jovian moon, Europa. This is a breach of the containment accords." Era nodded politely. "Thank you for the alert, Fleet Lord. Those signatures are from the new geothermal heating system for the Europan Aquatic Research Garden. We're trying to grow kelp. The permits are on file. Did you not receive the notification? We sent it to your logistics office 70 years ago. I can resend it." The Fleet Lord was silent for a long moment. "Kel? P. Edible seaweed," Era said cheerfully. "Very nutritious. It's part of our long-term sustainability study. Would your science team like the data?" We've made great progress on making it taste like chocolate. The Fleet Lord closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the fire was gone. Only ashes remained. You are growing snack food on a military frontier. We have to eat, Era said with a gentle shrug. And it's a nice garden. You should visit. The ice geysers are beautiful this time of century. This was the pattern. For over a century, every Kelios action was met not with counterfire, but with a breathtakingly mundane human project. A weapons test was met with an invitation to observe a new kind of flower blooming in a Venusian cloud habitat. A ship deployment was met with a helpful traffic advisory to avoid new civilian shipping lanes. The Kelios culture was built on honor, on decisive acts. There was no honor in this. There was only maintenance, and a slow, sinking feeling that they were not warriors, but very angry, very expensive janitors for the human race. The final straw was small. A Kelios patrol ship, bored and frustrated, fired upon a drifting piece of old human space junk, a discarded satellite casing from the pre-war era. It was a meaningless act, done just to feel the ship's guns fire. 20 minutes later, a small, boxy human service drone arrived. It scanned the new cloud of debris. Then it latched onto the largest piece, a twisted plate of metal, and began to paint it with a bright, non-toxic, orange paint. The Kelios patrol commander hailed it. "Human drone, what are you doing?" A synthesized, friendly voice replied. "Per orbital sanitation code 889, unmarked debris must be tagged for tracking. This is now debris object DK 11443. You have been fined for improper disposal. A work detail from your ship is welcome to assist in cleanup to reduce the fee." On the screen, the drone finished its painting. On the twisted metal, in clear orange, it had stenciled, "Littering equals bad. Please care for space. Thanks." The image was broadcast across the Kelios fleet. It broke something. There were no riots, no mutiny, just a deep, collective sigh. Warriors who had trained for glorious battle were now being given littering fines by a happy little box. Their great war, the crusade of their grandfathers, had been reduced to this. Parking ticket in the void. A week later, the new hail came to the continuity office. It was not from the Fleet Lord. It was from the Kelios historian sage, an ancient title for a counselor. The being on the screen was very old, its feathers almost white. Its eyes were not fierce, but sad and wise. "I wish to speak," the historian sage said, its voice like dry leaves. "Not to a commander, to the keeper of the first box, the one with the drawing." Era understood. She contacted her uncle, Park Jiho, the grandson of the original June. He was an old man now, a teacher of history. She also called for Lee Mina, the granddaughter of the pilot, who now captained a deep space botanical transport. "Will you go?" Era asked them. "He doesn't want a soldier. He wants to understand." Jiho packed a small bag with a tea set. Mina checked the engines of her most comfortable shuttle, the Gentle Rain. They met the Kelios historian sage not in space, but on Mars, in the very same tranquility station the Kelios had once raided. It was now a beautiful, thriving garden dome. Vines grew up the walls. The air was sweet and warm. The historian sage stood in the garden, looking awkward and out of place. It held a data slate containing the original Evum verdict, finally studied in full by its people. Jiho poured tea at a small stone table. Mina tended to a rose bush nearby. The historian sage did not touch the tea. It looked at the roses, the buzzing bees, the peaceful green light. It looked at the two humans, one old, one not young, who showed no fear. "We thought it was a weapon," the historian sage said finally, its voice quiet. "We prepared for a weapon. We did not prepare for a garden that grows while you watch." Jiho pushed the teacup closer. "It's just tea. It won't hurt you." The historian sage slowly reached out a clawed hand and lifted the delicate cup. It was a gesture of profound surrender. Not to an enemy, but to a different truth. "What do you want?" the historian sage asked. The core question of its people finally laid bare. Mina clipped a rose and placed it on the table. "We wanted you to see the garden. My great-grandmother, Yuna, she said you only declared war because you didn't know any other way to get our attention. You have it now. So, look at the garden. Have some tea. The war can be over whenever you stop shooting. We've been ready. The historian sage looked from the rose to the tea to the faces of the humans. He saw no victory there. No defeat. Only a quiet, endless capacity to be here, in this garden, whether the Kelios were outside or not. He sipped the tea. It was bitter and sweet, and very, very warm. The historian sage returned to the Kelios flagship with the rose from Tranquility Station preserved in a clear case. It did not call a war council. It asked for a gathering of the senior crew, the engineers, the teachers, and the young ones who had known nothing but this long, strange duty around the red planet. Placed the rose on the central console. Next to it, it placed the data slate showing the child's drawing from the vault. Then it played the recording from the garden. The images of old Jiho pouring tea, of Mina tending the plants, and the simple words, "The war can be over whenever you stop shooting. We've been ready." There was no debate. The fire for war had burned out decades ago, smothered under an avalanche of human patience and paperwork. What remained was not defeat, but exhaustion, and a dawning, quiet understanding. A formal request for an end of hostilities dialogue was sent to Earth. This time, the meeting place was Earth itself. A simple, open field at the edge of Seoul where the city met rolling hills. The sky was a soft blue. The air smelled of damp earth and growing things. For the humans, it was not a delegation of generals. Kim Era was there, representing continuity. Park Jiho was there for history. Lee Mina's daughter, a pilot named Lee Nari, was there. There were also farmers, teachers, and engineers. They stood on one side of a plain wooden table. A single Kelios shuttle, not a warship, descended. From it came the historian sage, Fleet Lord KTH, and a handful of other officials. They walked across the grass, their movements stiff. They were used to metal decks and the black of space. The green, living world was overwhelming. They stood across the table. The Fleet Lord looked at the faces before him. He saw no soldiers. He saw people who looked well settled. At home. The historian sage spoke first. We have read the Evam judgment. We understand now what they saw. We did not come to fight a war. We came to fight a story. And the story was wrong. Era nodded. Your story was of a dangerous enemy that needed to be broken. Our story was of a neighbor who needed time to understand. We just had different ideas about how long time is. Fleet Lord KTH's voice was rough. You did not beat us. You waited for us. My grandfather died waiting for a battle that never came. My father died reviewing your endless, polite complaints about debris. What was it for? Jiho, the old teacher, stepped forward. He placed a small object on the table. It was a smooth stone worn by water. It was for this, he said. For the chance to stand here on a warm day and talk. The Evam saw that if we fought your war in your way, it would never end. It would echo for 10,000 more years. We chose a different path. We chose to let your anger run its course, like a storm, while we tended the garden. The storm is tired now. The garden is still here. He pushed the stone towards the Fleet Lord. A souvenir, from a river on Earth. It took 1,000,000 years to make it that smooth. We think in those terms. The Fleet Lord stared at the stone. He reached out a clawed hand and picked it up. It was warm from the sun. The simplicity of it, the immense age it represented, finally made the scale clear. They had been fighting against time itself, and time did not fight back. It just continued. What happens now? The historian sage asked. Era smiled. It was a kind smile. Now you have choices. You can go home. Your ships will be given safe passage and the coordinates for clear space lanes. You can stay if you wish. There are empty fields on Mars. You could learn to grow something. Some of your people might like to visit our schools. We are very good at teaching long, slow lessons. The offer was so absurd, so peaceful, that the Kelios had no protocol for it. Take a field on Mars? Attend a school? And the past? The ships lost? The time wasted? The Fleet Lord asked. Mina's daughter, Nari, answered. We have very good archives. We can add it to the history lessons. For our children and yours. So the next time someone thinks about a war, they can read about how boring it turned out to be. How the big, brave fleet lords eventually had to deal with building inspectors and kelp farmers. A sound came from one of the younger Kelios officers. A sharp, choked gasp. It was, against all odds, a laugh. A laugh of pure, relieved hysteria. The tension broke. The historian sage bowed its head, a gesture of respect. We will go home. We will tell them the story. Not of the humans who fought, but of the humans who gardened. The agreement was not written on a grand treaty of metal and light. It was written on simple paper, signed there in the field. It had one main clause. Either party could request a conversation at any time, for any reason. No waiting. No formal declarations needed. As the Kelios prepared to leave, the historian sage looked back at the table, the stone, the ordinary humans. You really did just outlast us. Era shook her head. No, we just had a different clock. And we always had room for one more at the table, if you ever decided to stop shouting and sit down. The Kelios shuttle lifted into the sky, growing smaller until it was gone. Back in the continuity office, the watchstanders noted the departure. The long watch protocol was officially stood down. There was no cheering. Someone brought in a cake. People went back to their work, now focused on next season's crop yields on the orbital farms. That evening, Era walked through the same streets where her great-grandmother Yuna had once driven on the day of the declaration. The city was calm. Lights were coming on in windows where families were eating dinner. She thought of the child's drawing in the vault, of the stick figures holding hands. It wasn't a naive dream. It had been a choice. A choice to be the kind of people who could wait 10,000 years for the other figure to finally reach back. She didn't chuckle. She just smiled. A small, quiet smile of a job at long last, finished. The galaxy had offered humanity a war. And humanity, with simple patience and a few cups of tea, had politely declined.